It is an incredible pleasure, as always, to be joined by Thomas Frank, author of Listen Liberal and The People Know, and most recently of this great op-ed in the New York Times called The Deadly Lack of Imagination in the Democratic Party. Welcome back, Thomas.
Briahna, great to see you again.
Look, it's this funny thing that keeps happening whenever you're on the show, it's when something kind of cataclysmic is going on the Hill. A couple of shows ago, a couple of appearances ago on Bad Faith was 1-6, and you were here. We were kind of workshopping through what was happening as we were watching the Twitter scroll by of smoking capitals.
That was I sometimes wonder if I dreamed that, but we really watched that as it was happening, right?
As it was happening.
As it was taking place. And you and I are both here in Washington too, right?
Yep.
It's crazy. I sometimes wonder if that really happened, but it did.
It really happened. And moreover, we were talking about the history of populist movements for obvious reasons and kind of evaluating real time whether what was happening at the Capitol could be characterized as such, what was going on with the faux populism of the Trump movement, what was its appeal, how was the Democratic Party in some way at fault for abandoning workers, all of those kinds of conversations that come out of your amazing work in books like Listen Liberal.
You know, since that day, I had forgotten at the time, or maybe I told you about this at the time, and then it slipped out of my own memory. But there was a kind of analogous episode in the history of populism when in Kansas. I mean, you would never know this unless you're from Kansas and we're kind of like me, right? You're like obsessed with this stuff in the 1890s. There was a contested election to the Kansas legislature. Both at the time, the two parties were the populists and the Republicans. The Democrats have never been important in Kansas, and it was disputed who had actually won the legislature, the House of Representatives of Kansas, and it came to physical violence. And I forget. Here's the problem: I don't remember which side did what, but I believe the populists holed up on the floor of the state legislature, and the Republicans smashed the door down. Both sides were armed, of course, right? It's the Wild West, basically, and the Republicans wound up winning that time, storming the legislature. But it's funny because, in retrospect, the Republicans, who were openly the party of business and propriety and all that stuff, were willing to do anything to stop these guys because they regarded populists as the populists were utterly unacceptable. They were people like you and me that couldn't be allowed, right? And
well, look, as we speak, of course, we're alluding to the fact that the Republicans have been unable to get to the 218 vote number that they need to confirm.
This is happening right now, by the way. This is happening right now.
Where I think they're about to do a fifth vote, or they're in the middle of a fifth vote, perhaps, while we're talking. There were 3 votes yesterday and 1 already today, in which Kevin McCarthy can't seem to get more than about 202 votes on his way to 218. Donald Trump weighed in this morning.
I'm just weeping big tears for Kevin McCarthy. I'm so sorry for him.
But this is the question. I mean, you talk about violence on the floor. Lauren Boebert has, in the first move of a Republican House, presided over the removal of the metal detectors at the door.
I saw that. It's gonna be like, when I went to high school back in the 80s, you could bring it.
I mean, and of course, the historical precedent for this. I don't know how much you knew about this, Tom, before we all started talking about it in the context of this political moment. But the 1856 precedent for this, which was the longest period of time that that chamber has gone without a speaker, a majority leader, was 2 months back then, and they did, I think, 133 votes. Did they say? So this could get really crazy.
And I can only guess what they were arguing about.
Well, look, there was a caning on the floor. There were fisticuffs in the chamber. Oh my
God!
So not that anybody is wishing for that sort of a thing, but given the precedent of what happens when you and I talk on this podcast, Thomas, who knows? Anything goes. So I don't want to belabor this. I know I didn't bring you on to talk about this specifically, but given your
but wait, there is. So of course, you emailed me about this earlier in the day, and at first I was like, no, I don't want to talk about that. I'm very history minded. My head is always in the past, but then I started thinking about it. This is actually a fascinating subject. It's among other things. This is nobody remembers this, but I wrote this book 20 years ago called "What's the Matter with Kansas," and it's about the war in the Kansas Republican Party between the moderates and the conservatives, which is what we see playing out right now. I mean, and this has been going in Kansas for longer than since I wrote the book. It was already well established by then. It's at least 30 years, we can talk about what that looks like and what it's resulted in. But I also remember when I was writing that book, I went out and bought this. Do you remember these guys? The Freshmen. Newt
so you're holding up a book with. Yeah, go ahead. For the people only listening.
Yeah, Newt Gingrich and his pals who took over Congress in 1994, and it was a. So I'm older than you, and I remember this very, very well. I didn't live in Washington at the time. I lived in Chicago, but the media turned little somersaults of love over the freshmen. These are Republican firebrands, okay? They're basically throwing out the Republican leadership and replacing them with true believers. This is what they were doing, and this is the kind of this is where all of this stuff begins. And there's been one rebellion after another from the Republican. I don't want to say rank and file because these guys aren't rank and file. They are members of Congress. They're business owners, usually, that sort of thing. But one rebellion after another. And one of the reasons that it happens with such regularity is because when it happened the first time, they were supposed to be America's congressmen. We were all supposed to love them. This is the author of this book has since turned very critical of Republicans. Maybe she was critical of Republicans then. But this is how she introduces them, the freshmen. They were brash, irrepressible, and passionately committed to the cause of balancing the budget, Briahna. They're passionate about balancing the budget and shrinking the size of the federal government. The freshmen were a new breed. Different from the men and women who had preceded them in Congress. They were not polished cookie-cutter politicians. They weren't cookie-cutter politicians, Briahna. They were quirky and plain-spoken. And their leader, other than Newt Gingrich, aside from Newt Gingrich, one of their leaders was Sam Brownback from Kansas, that becomes the main character in this book. And became sort of my nemesis for. Well, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know, but became like the guy that I always imagined as my exact opposite in politics. But here he's being hailed as this real regular guy. All he wants is reform. He's a plain spoken,
Well, even worse than that. Not that he's a regular because all he wants is reform, but that he's like a plucky upstart who has the people's ear because he wants to check notes, balance the budget, as though that's what's like galvanizing the American public. Right,
exactly. And do you remember Newt Gingrich's? Do you remember what was it called? The Contract with America. Oh, Briahna, the Contract with America. Do you remember what the elements of it were? And Newt used to have a small version of it on a note card that he had laminated, and he wore it on a string around his neck. And when they passed an item from it, he would get out a hole punch and
punch it like a library card.
or like a meal ticket or whatever, right? He had finished that item. He was delivering for the American people. And that's where can I curse on this show?
Absolutely.
That's where all of this bullshit begins. I mean, I don't want to trace all the bullshit in American political life to those days, because I think that's blaming everything on Newt Gingrich and imagining him as a figure of like almost satanic evil is really overdone. Well,
it's a useful trajectory, because I was reminded today that part of what's going on with Kevin McCarthy is that he already feels like he was usurped the first time, that he was displaced. Then in all of the shenanigans over getting John Boehner out of the speakership position, he got pushed out.
Boehner was one of these guys. So this is what, and here's what is so fascinating about this. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you, by the way.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. you keep having these fresh-faced Republicans who come in and they're plain-spoken rebels and blah 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 blah, and they're rising up against the cookie-cutter politicians, and they're rebelling against the term they used to use in the '90s was politics as usual. Oh, Briahna, they're against politics as usual, and they're like always these firebrand, and they're always celebrated by the media, or the media gapes at them in horror, and then they slowly become centrists, or they don't become centrists, but somehow they fit that position. And Boehner is a perfect example. Paul Ryan was another one in the 90s. Paul Ryan was a radical. He was one of these firebrands. And then they become the old guard, and then they get overthrown. And Ted Cruz is now following that same trajectory. It was just a few years ago that he was the most extreme member of Congress.
Right. I mean, it does feel like a race to the bottom, which is why this moment is so funny. I'm so glad you brought up those historical parallels, because once again, you have someone, Kevin McCarthy, who was supposed to be the one and got usurped by Paul Ryan. So he's not even like a fresh face. He was the old fresh face who's now angling for the spot that he felt like he always deserved, who again is positioning himself as somehow the media can't quite decide how to describe him. He is both Trumpy, but not a part of the Freedom Caucus cohort that is opposing him, obviously. There are people from that cohort on either side of this. Lauren Boebert is pro obstruction. I almost called her Sarah Jessica Parker, LOL. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Taylor Greene is for Kevin McCarthy. It's not easy to define the political roles here, but what is clear is that the holdouts, again, are focusing primarily on, I would call them more administrative or procedural asks, to the extent that they're even willing to commit to specific asks, because I think that this is largely performative and not about actually securing anything in particular. They've resisted putting things on paper, any demands that actually could be satisfied. But to the extent that they are articulating reasons for holding out, they are largely procedural. And there's just been this weird flip where the Republicans, because they are in power, are saying, and then the House are saying, well, we need to get the ball moving because we have substantive concerns that these radicals are ignoring in favor of procedural concerns. Isn't that kind of a weird posture to take for the group that historically has been the upstart, or is positioning itself as the upstart?
But wait, look, you're putting your finger on one of the big mysteries. Well, it's not a mystery. So this is the sort of cultural rhythm of our politics during our lifetimes. Now, 80 years ago, it was very different. And it was the Democrats that were, always fighting amongst themselves and were the upstarts and had the rebel caucus and all that, blah, 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 blah. There was also we've left a step out, which is the Tea Party uprising that brings Boehner in, right, as speaker. And you think of the members of that. And that was really the last time I cared about the Republican Party. After that, I swore that I would never write about it again. I wrote Pity the Billionaire, and I spent 2 years hanging around with these Tea Party people and going to rallies and we'd have conventions, like a stamp collecting convention, only it was for politics, and they'd sell each other things. And the people who were radicals then are like I think of Rand Paul. Rand Paul was like the Tea Party upstart, and now doesn't seem that radical. Seems like kind of sensible in a lot of ways.
Well, it's like watching George Bush talking about immigration now, or Bush 1 talking about immigration.
Oh my God.
Now. It's to the left of Obama.
I did I ever tell you? So that was one of the first elections that I really followed closely, 88. And I grew to just despise George Bush Sr. And I think largely because of the Willie Horton commercial, but also because of his contemptuous attitude towards Dukakis and the idiotic things like touring a flag factory. I just hated him. I hated him. And now you go and look at the guy and you're like, damn, I wish we had.
He's an intellectual. So to answer me this, what do you think happened there? I mean, Republicans will say, I didn't leave the party left me. You write and talk very persuasively about the ways in which the Democratic Party in particular kind of created this opening for faux populists on the right because of their abandonment of labor.
Yes. So this is the fascinating question. So this generation after generation of Republican rebellions, And in my Times article, I listed some of them, beginning with the California tax revolt, Prop 13. I think that was 78. But then that led sort of, and then there was a whole bunch of right wingers elected to Congress that year. It was shocking and new.
What was the nature of the tax revolt?
Prop 13. It was about property taxes. It was passed. It was passed as a proposition by the general public as a, what do you call that? A
ballot measure?
A referendum. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was led by this guy called Howard Jarvis, who everywhere he went, he tried. There was a popular movie at the time called Network, and which a character yells, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." So Howard Jarvis, the leader of the tax revolt in California, took this as his rallying cry.
Oh, geez.
And he had a book. I wish I could fish it off the shelf, but it's long buried. Where he's like, I think that's the title of the book. It's like "Mad as Hell" or something like that.
Well, it's so ironic because it's a progressive message in the film.
Oh, right, but these guys never pay attention long enough to figure something like that out. And by the way, the Tea Party movement did the same thing. I remember I went to one of my very few distinctions in life, Briahna, is that I went to the very first Tea Party rally. It was here in Washington. It was about a week after the Rick Santelli thing on TV. Obama had just been sworn in, and it was in the park across the street from the White House. And it was a little. They were confused at the time. They weren't really sure what they stood for, and it was just it was the kind of people that go to every sort of Republican protest, which is, by the way, itself kind of a joke. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as a Republican protest. And anyhow, but they were trying to, there was a bunch of them were using this as their rallying cry. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it. They keep coming back to the same imagery and the same, slogans without ever real, anyhow.
Yeah. You know what's funny about Network, by the way? Since you just brought it up, I was on, TikTok, and I just saw the statistic that the Academy Award won for the shortest period of screen time was the wife character in Network.
I did not know that.
Yes, I just discovered this the other day. Thank you, TikTok. If I'm wrong, then blame TikTok. But it's a great film. Everybody should watch it if you haven't already. So again, what you just said about the Tea Party activists, protesters not really realizing what it was all about.
One rebellion. Yeah, they had agreement. Well, that was one of the great. So here's the question that you originally asked, which I was trying to answer, and my mind wanders, and I apologize.
It's great. We love that about you.
What you asked was like, is this good or bad for the Republican Party? Because when I wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas," everyone said, and I remember talking to a very powerful Democratic operative at the time, telling him about my research and what I had found, and he said, "Yeah, the Republican Party's gone too far to the right." Well, since then they elected George W. Bush. They declared this war and that. They cut taxes X number of times. Donald Trump. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going. And so ultimately, I would have to say that the reason this keeps happening is because this is a successful strategy. This is a strategy that succeeds. Newt Gingrich succeeded. Think about this. The Democratic Party had controlled the House of Representatives from 1931 until 1995, Newt Gingrich's election, with only 2 brief interruptions. Since Gingrich, the Republican Party has been very competitive and has won at about 50%, has controlled it about 50% of the time. Well, when I was a child, when I was born, that was unthinkable. The Democrats were the permanent majority party because they were the party of working people, and everybody knew it, So you have to say this strategy succeeded. The Tea Party is possibly the best example of this. Look at what George W. Bush, well, first Reagan, then Bush, what they do. They deregulate Wall Street. Had a little help from Bill Clinton, a lot of help from Bill Clinton. They deregulate Wall Street. They appoint these absolutely incompetent people to regulate Wall Street, to regulate the financial industry. Lo and behold, the financial industry goes and throws the world economy off a cliff. And the Republican Party is massively disgraced in 2008. I mean, massively. It looks like 1932 all over again. It's, a stock market crash. We're heading into a terrible recession, possibly a depression. The Democrats come up with a guy who at first seems to be another Franklin Roosevelt. Really has the skills. brilliant. It brings with him all of the smartest guys in Washington. I was one of those people that thought this is going to be great. Look at this. 2 years later, this utterly disgraced Republican Party comes back with a massive sweeping red wave like we've never seen before.
Well, isn't it part of the reason
that's the Tea Party movement?
Obama brings with him some of the smartest guys in Washington. He also brings in some of the most culpable guys on Wall Street. Yep. And there was never any culpability for the crash.
Absolutely.
So if you look at the Republicans
we have to do one thing at a time.
Sure. But just to continue to bring these parallels, what's so interesting is how Republicans now, the ones that want Kevin McCarthy to be nominated, voted into the speakership, are saying things like, we've got to get on with the business of Congress because we have to do things like investigate Hunter Biden's laptop and investigate Anthony Fauci. And so they have more energy, whatever you think about those projects. I think it is indisputable that they are lesser projects than investigating the crooks that caused so many millions of Americans to lose 30 or 40% of their total savings,
their net worth. Absolutely.
Market.
Oh my God.
And yet that never happened. And so here's the void.
So got to correct you on that. There was a Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. I know quite a bit about this.
So tell us about this.
But the point that you were making is exactly right. So Obama totally dropped the ball on this. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but he did. And so the Republicans, meanwhile, were made up this fake hard times protest movement, aka the Tea Party movement, phony, and I, like I said, I went to a bunch of these rallies, and they did, they pretended to be the copies of Ayn Rand and yelling through the bullhorn and waving these placards, right? And they tried to look like, they did everything they could to look like, a AFL-CIO protest from the 1930s or something like this, right? And I laughed at them. I wrote about them in the Wall Street Journal at the time as, this is ridiculous. What an obvious fraud. I'll be damned. They won. They convinced the American public that they represented, the voice of rebellion, and that Obama and company did not. And so it's both. You have two things going on. You have the Republicans continually doing this act that's going on right now on the floor of Congress, and then you have the Democrats who are like, no, we'll bring in some guys with the guys from Harvard, and they'll fix it.
Right. So here's what I want to get to. If this strategy works, I heard someone say, maybe it was even Ralph Nader, that it seems like the only person reading Saul Alinsky right now are the right. That the right is very cognizant of the ways that these protest techniques
that's totally true, by the way,
are effective
after demonizing him. Do you remember that? After demonizing him, they said, "Oh my God." Okay.
So now we're in this place where the Republicans are doing this thing in Congress. 20 at least of the Republicans are doing this thing in Congress. It's irritating all of the establishment Republicans. The Democrats are literally bringing popcorn to Congress to sit and watch, kind of very performatively enjoying the whole thing. And I got to say, there's a part of me that's frustrated, a big part of me, for folks that know me and know how much I've been advocating around this issue since 2021, that wishes that Democrats would bring the same energy. So why is it that 2 years ago, when Democrats had a narrow majority in the House, that the squad members didn't pull the same kind of maneuver? And when I turn on MSNBC or C-SPAN or whatever I was watching just now before we started recording, and I see the speeches that are being given, the nomination speeches that they give before each round of voting, Republicans are filtering through a number of folks that they're nominating here and there. It doesn't seem to matter who. What seems to matter is they take this opportunity to claim the time for themselves and say what they want to say to the American people. What an amazing thing it would be if we had had a series of squad members stand up and make it clear to the American public, as all eyes were trained on them, what it was that Joe Biden could do by executive order and why he wouldn't do it. The problem of influence and corporate money in politics, and the fact that he took more money from from billionaires in the course of the primary than any other candidate, and what that could mean for his presidency if he isn't held accountable. That he should immediately sign student debt cancellation into law as a day one agenda item. And that you could start to get some of those concessions, floor votes on Medicare for all, procedural changes that make it easier to out the speaker, anything that you wanted, literally anything that you wanted, while America was at rapt attention. Why don't we get that?
Oh my God. going to have to sign me up for another hour here. It's a great question, Briahna, but I want you to, because it involves both the behavior of the party's leadership, but it also involves the behavior of the people who should be the party's rebels, who aren't interested in doing that, And you see that again and again and again in the Democratic Party. That it used to be, there was a saying back in the 70s, that I don't even remember the saying, but it ended with, and Republicans get in line. Democrats get, well, I don't remember how it goes, but the idea is that Democrats always fight among themselves, and Republicans always get in line at the end of the day. They
Democrats in disarray. That's the label.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to work that way anymore. But here's the point. The point that I want to get to is this: the Democratic Party exists in some ways. I think exists to keep the left in check. Do you remember a guy called Bernie Sanders?
Vaguely familiar.
Just recall what happened to him in 2016 and again in 2020. And the funny thing was that it wasn't all that long ago that guys like Bernie Sanders would have had a great and honored career in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party used to have lots of guys like Bernie Sanders with the same politics as Bernie Sanders, with a lot of the same views as Bernie Sanders. But beginning in the 80s and 90s, the Democratic Party was sort of captured by this faction, the sort of Clinton faction that I have written about now. I used to write about Republicans all the time. Now I write about Democrats. This faction that has more or less controlled the party ever since, and that has zero tolerance for the for the left wing of the party, which is it's really quite remarkable, because it was a long civil war. It wasn't like they just and having won it, they now have zero tolerance for the other side. Whereas in the Republican Party, the right seems to be able to, which is objectively a smaller faction than the centrist Republican, the moderate Republicans. The right is always able to to pull them kicking and screaming right along with them. It's actually really, really fascinating. We could talk about it for hours.
Look, I was struck by the imagery. So people were joking about the fact that Kevin McCarthy was moving his furniture into the speaker's office, but it's not altogether clear that he'll get to stay. And some congressman wrote a letter saying, he's a squatter, campus police. Are you gonna get him out of there? But I was watching all of this play out on Twitter, and I was seeing progressive Congress members and liberals applaud this, kind of laughing at the idea that McCarthy's desk would have to be pulled back out. The visual imagery of his desk pulled back out.
It would be funny.
It would be funny, but here's the thing that was troubling me and preventing me from laughing and enjoying the situation. I would have loved to have seen Nancy Pelosi's desk get pulled out of her office. Can you imagine polls? I was reminded of this as I was going back through my articles about Force the Vote and the things that I was saying 2 years ago for the left strategy here. That 3/4 of Americans at the time polled wanted Nancy Pelosi to step down. Some people because they're Republicans and they hate her. Some people because they're liberals and they like her, but they just think that she's run her course. Some people because they're progressives and they understood viscerally that Nancy Pelosi stood firmly in the way of the entire progressive agenda and had been doing so for decades. That she was the crux of the problem, but she was the first boss you could had to pass before you got anywhere near the final boss of conservatives, as it were. And the idea that wasn't in people's minds, the idea that these so-called progressives are sitting there in Congress relishing the sight of this happening to Kevin McCarthy at the same time that it is not Kevin McCarthy, but it is Nancy Pelosi who's been bullying them, cajoling them, making them cry on the floor of the House for these last 2 years. And they still didn't take that opportunity to extract even. Cry? Oh, you don't remember the whole thing with AOC and the Iron Dome vote where she voted, I think, against it to fund the Iron Dome in Israel. And then Nancy Pelosi went down and talked to her, and there was a stern conversation. You can't hear anything. It's C-SPAN. And then she's crying, and then she revises her vote to a present, I think.
I did not remember that. So this is what happens when I basically stopped following all of this stuff. The day-to-day stuff. I don't know when I stopped following it. Look, you're saying something that's really important, But I also want to say in Nancy Pelosi's, to her credit, Obamacare would never have passed if it wasn't for her. Do you remember this? This was sort of her great moment. She got that thing passed. The administration had no idea what to do. What year was that? 2010. They had no idea what to do, and she got it done because she knew how. And that was impressive, but that doesn't excuse making someone cry.
And I'm not saying I know anything one or the other. All we have is the perspective of history. Yeah. We don't know what would have happened in the alternative. We can't project into the future what will happen if we take different courses. All we can do is guess. But there is an argument for sure that says, given the popularity of a program like Medicare for All, given the popularity of universal health care with 50% of Republicans even supporting it at this point, or as of the polls that I was citing during the Bernie campaign, that having a compromise policy like the ACA, which was Romney Care, which was a Republican health care plan, did the very thing that we were talking about, which is protect the country from the left and consolidate around a plausibly left enough opinion that prevents real more radical reform from ever manifesting. And to that end, Pelosi's successes are our country's failures.
Good point. And you're describing there, when you say that, you're describing in a nutshell almost the entire strategy of the Democratic Party. It is to, yes, we care about your health. Look at what we did. And it turns the solution that they got turns out to be like totally inadequate and by the standards of every other country's universal health program,
and enriching in the pharmaceutical industry, enriching the middleman and the process.
And the insurance companies.
And the insurance companies.
This is yes, it is don't get me wrong. That is exactly right. Now, look, I want to, what we're trying to get at here is it a good strategy? And I think this, looking at the Republicans, we're all, sitting around laughing at Kevin McCarthy's desk and, whatever else. But we can see objectively over the long term, yes, this is a successful strategy. This is what wins in modern day politics. Look, this country hates authority.
Yeah.
This country hates elites. It does. And like, if you posture as the party that is, top down control by a bunch of white billionaires and white collar guys from, with PhDs from whatever, that's people, it shouldn't be a surprise if people don't love you for that.
Right.
That's not a particularly popular position. And the Republicans who have, look, you and I have our eyes open. We know the Republicans have a lot to answer for. That wave after wave after wave of fake populist rebellion has nevertheless really tickled this country's desire for populist rebellion. That's what people want in this country, and they give it to them. Come on, Donald Trump, the last example. Right. Jesus H. Christ, what a huge subject now. Look at what we've done.
Well, this is great. I love this. I love this because here's you were just saying the thing about Donald Trump. So we're in a world where people are evaluating what his power is even going to be going forward. Everyone is kind of doom and gloom about the prospect of Ron DeSantis just running ramshot over a Donald Trump campaign, saying that his announcement was low energy, that his endorsed candidates didn't do so well. Trump has pushed back against that, I think, in some ways that don't get enough credit. Numbers wise, his odds in terms of his endorsed candidates weren't that bad. It's the fact that there were some high profile people that really screwed the pooch in ways that were strategically meaningful for the Republican Party. But he's made a lot of positive calls. He called the Dobbs thing and how abortion was going to hurt Republicans, right? All of that. At the same time, there's still these questions about whether or not he's going to have the same influence that he had in yesteryear and whether the populism is still with him. Ron DeSantis is an egghead from Harvard.
Oh, is he? I didn't know. I don't know much about DeSantis.
I think he's a Harvard law guy. They're all Harvard law guys. So,
but they do the act, Briahna. They do this act. This is what is so fascinating about them. They do the act. The Democrats are like, I'm not going to do that act.
Well, right. Well, that's the problem. They don't even respect. Who's the person who said, the Democrats at least, the Republicans at least, respect me enough to sell me a lie. The Democrats just disrespect me to my face. So here comes Ron DeSantis, and he has to get to be tested on the stage. But what's so interesting in this moment is Trump gave his he gave his support to McCarthy and said, come on, Republicans, let's get on with it this morning. There was a subsequent vote, and it didn't change a thing. Trump's pressure to go ahead and confirm McCarthy doesn't seem to have shifted the vote at all in McCarthy's favor. In fact, an additional person voted present. Additional Republican voted present in the subsequent vote. Meanwhile, they haven't asked DeSantis about this yet. I think they're hiding him away to protect him from the kind of standoff that could emerge if he feels differently than Trump. And if there's solidarity of interest between the two of them, well, that's a problem if McCarthy, in fact, fails and he's on record as the Republican vanguard as having backed the loser. So, I mean, what do you make of all of that kind of mess that's emerging in terms of the battle over who owns right populism going forward?
Yeah. I think Trump is probably a spent force at this point. You go back and look at what he was talking about in 2016, and he was talking about things that were genuinely of concern to the American public. Now he's talking about things that are of concern to himself and his core followers. It's like he was unfairly treated in 2020. This happened, that happened, and it's just rehashing the battles from his own presidency.
What about DeSantis, by contrast, with all of the emphasis on the wokeness? Is that not similarly kind of self-interested?
Oh, absolutely. But I haven't been following Ron DeSantis. I have to tell you, I gave up on all this to work on my stamp collection this year. And I think the backlash against the woke thing. I mean, the woke thing itself has sort of burned out, but I think the backlash against it will be going for a long time. I say that because the backlash against the 1960s ran for about 20 years. I remember I was up in Wisconsin. This has to be late 80s, early 90s. There's a guy running for Congress. Sorry, it was in Chicago. It was in the south side of Chicago. A guy was running for Congress and like was denouncing hippies as part of his campaign. This is in the far south side of Chicago. He won. He got elected to Congress, still railing against the hippies of the 1960s. This is 30 years later. These things move very slowly, and they go and they go and they go. And so I'm very sorry to say, I think that backlash has legs.
Okay. So
but that said, I don't know anything about Ron DeSantis.
I think there's potential to that, but at the same time, it's funny what gets characterized as kind of culture war or wokeness and what gets characterized as more substantively political. Because you could say the backlash against Dobbs, the fact that Republicans fared so much more poorly than anticipated in the
I think
House
that's
race
very important, by the way,
is a kind of a culture war thing too. And it is a reaffirmation of so-called wokeness, whatever you want to call it. And that some of the stuff around, I thought that COVID was maybe going to have a bigger impact in the midterms. It didn't really. Some of the culture wars around the book bans and the burning. I mean, it could be that the Republicans are taking this to a crazy place and taking it too far. There's a law right now, I believe in Louisiana, that's just going on the books, where to watch pornography, you have to prove you're 18 by putting in your ID card information. So you gotta show your government before you boot up.
Crackdown on pornography. All right, it's like back to the 70s or whatever.
Exactly. And I hate to tell folks, Republicans, there's plenty of Republicans that are watching porn that are not going to be wild about this law.
I know. So, Briahna, my theory of the culture wars. What's the matter with Kansas was about the culture wars. That was my theory of like what had happened. How did the right do this? Because you've got a series of unpopular positions that they have nevertheless ridden to power. So in Kansas, abortion was the main thing that had got the right up and running, but there was a bunch of subsidiary issues. Gun control was obviously important. The theory of evolution, they were fighting over the theory of evolution. How many people want to pick up that fight? And so that's what I was asking myself, because all of these things are objectively unpopular. So the right-wing position on abortion is like it's like a 30% issue, or a 20% issue or something like that. How do you what's the word? Finesse this. How do you want to win those voters over because they've got all the motivation and they're out there knocking on the doors and they've got, And there's also something about this that, and I'll get to this in a second, there's something about this that appeals to the general public, regardless of it being a minority issue. But you want to take that minority issue and you want to win with it. How do you do that? One way to do that is to never deliver on it.
Right.
And so like the theory of evolution, guess what? They're still teaching it. There's nothing you can do about that.
Well, that's the problem with Dobbs, is that they actually were successful. It was the dog caught the car situation.
Yes. So for years, the Republicans had this sort of hands-off thing with the anti-abortion people. Like, you remember Ronald Reagan, who was the greatest, or they always thought he's our great champion in the White House. Ronald Reagan had actually signed the law in California legalizing abortion in the days before Roe v. Wade. And then he proceeded as president to appoint a whole bunch of moderate Republicans to the bench who weren't interested in overturning Roe v. Wade. And when he would speak to the anti-abortion groups, he would always do it like we're doing it now, by remote, he would speak into a microphone somewhere and it would come out. He would never show up in person, is what I'm saying. So you'd never get that close to them, but you want their energy. You want their motivation. And so I was looking at Kansas, where it's like one culture war after another. And by the way, this is a national story now. This, Fox News. It's just you if you watch. By the way, I spent the last couple of years with an elderly parent who has since passed on, and he discovered Fox News at some point, and I hadn't watched it in many years, but it's amazing to me. They try out new culture wars every day, literally every day, Briahna, just inventing shit. And then it's like they're just throwing shit at the wall. And
the green M&M fiasco, did you see that?
Yeah, but the thing is, they're all forgotten. So let's say they try out 8 new culture wars today, and none of them catch. Tomorrow they try out 8 more. One of them, the audience responds a little bit. They start hammering on that one. But these things never have to be majority issues. In fact, they almost never are. The whole trick is to capture that energy. I don't like calling these people populists because they're not they're not in the Bernie Sanders vein. They're not in the populist vein, but they are a kind of fake populist. They do have that populist energy, and they are talking on behalf of ordinary people against authority. In this case, legal authority. If you go back and if you dig into the anti-abortion literature, so much of it is concerned with the authority of doctors and of the legal profession, Roe v. Wade and all this. They were obsessed with this. And that aspect of it is quite compelling. Their war against what they consider to be unjust authority. And my whole theory about that was the theory. And what's the matter with Kansas is that what the power of the right-wing uprising is that it targets the professional elites. It targets the professional class. I don't remember how that dawned on me. Oh, it was the evolution thing. Oh my God. Well, we're getting off the track here.
No, you said something. I was listening to your series of video lectures, and you said something really interesting about it. What was it? You said the left is a party siding with the well-to-do. You had some fun. Oh, people whose earnings are derived from learnings.
That was Bill Clinton.
That was Bill Clinton. Okay.
Yeah. What you earn depends on what you can learn. This was one of his aphorisms. He would say this all the time.
We live in a world where what you earn depends on what you can learn, where the average 18-year-old will change jobs 8 times in a lifetime, and where none of us can promise any of you that what you now do for a living is absolutely safe from now on.
What you earn depends on what you can learn. Therefore, if somebody is affluent, you can tell that's because they're very smart. It's sort of like Calvinism, only instead of your virtue, instead of your inherent chosenness by God, you got good grades, you got a high
exactly.
SAT score.
Exactly, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Thomas, because this is what is so perverse about what's going on with this conversation around student debt right now. Everyone has collectively memory hold all of the value judgments and virtue signaling that was done around educational attainment, and how for my entire childhood, all I heard was, if you are losing in society, if you are poor, if you can't make rent, the reason is because you didn't go to college. And your raison d'etre, your entire purpose in life has to be to, by hook or by crook, get into college, pay whatever it takes. It's like college is the last ship leaving planet Earth. And if you're not on it, you're going down with the asteroid. Right? And now all
That's
of a sudden,
what they said. That's what they told us. Yes.
That's the solution for prisoners, is that you need to be able to enroll in college when you're in prison. The solution for every solution to the problem was education, re-education, training. And now they turn around and said, oh, I'm sorry. Did you have $30,000, $100,000, $500,000 of debt from that thing that I wagged my finger at you and told you should do if you wanted anybody to care about your outcomes in life? Sorry. That was a bargain.
Do you remember?
You signed up for it. Yeah, go ahead.
Obama, and so I actually wanted to get back to my talk. So I've got a talk up on YouTube that I've been giving over the last year, and it's sort of it is the Tom Frank view of the world all in 1 hour. And so much of this is what's wrong with the Democratic Party, is that they have obsessed. They've become utterly obsessed with education. It begins with, it begins in the late 1960s. You and I have actually talked about this before, but it begins in the late 1960s when they decide that the main constituency, or the most important constituency of the Democratic Party, is not going to be labor anymore. It's not going to be any of the other groups. It's going to be students.
Yeah.
Why students? Because there was something, everybody was telling us there's something magical about college students. And this is the SDS was saying the same thing. College students are the new proletariat. They're the ones who really understand. This is the only group that matters. And this mutates via Bill Clinton and via Barack Obama into basically them becoming a party of the professional elite, who are by definition people with advanced degrees. That's what defines the professional elite. And that's who the Democratic Party is. Both Bill Clinton, remember how you were talking about, like, the only way to succeed in American life is through education. We thought that because that's the life story of both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. That's how they succeeded, and Hillary Clinton. And if you go right down the list of the other sort of leading Democratic people, that's how they succeeded in life. I mean, they were plucked from obscurity by a fancy school. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Barack Obama was a professor at Harvard Law. By the way, I was susceptible to some of this myself. I remember when I met Barack Obama. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and I had been a graduate student there. And I thought, like, this is a really, really intelligent man. I was very impressed by him. And it wasn't until he was president that I realized that's not enough.
Yeah, he got all of us. I mean, but that's also what we were told. We were told that the reason the world is messed up. So go ahead.
He used the word investment. You have to make your college investment. And that's basically he's talking about student loans there. You are making an investment in your future. And we all did it. I mean, your generation did it. I was already done by then.
And the investment didn't pay it off. And now the government wants to renege on its end of the social contract at the same time that it's telling you that there wasn't a contract at all, that there was no inducement whatsoever. Especially Joe Biden's role in student debt. I know. It makes it particularly egregious.
And wait, there's so many layers of this that we can have fun with. Like when they tell you what to study, like, oh, everybody needs to go learn to code. And then it's like, dude, if everybody learns to code,
it's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, or they're like, everybody needs to study the STEM subjects.
Right.
And then it's like 10 years from now, like, you studied the STEM subjects? What the hell were you? Everybody knows now you're supposed to study Latin.
It's everyone knows that this is my other force the vote and student debt cancellation are my two biggest bugaboos. So it's like really telling that they're both coming up in this conversation today.
Wait, can I throw in one more?
Please.
So I was one of those guys that followed this advice. Oh my God, I got a PhD.
At least those are cheaper.
That's right. It was very cheap. I got a PhD in history, American history, cultural and intellectual history. That was my subject. And whoa, I went out on the job market, and guess what, Briahna?
Well, look, that's the other part of this. It's like I hate reducing the value of these of education just to how much you can be remunerated for it later on, because obviously the things that you studied were incredibly valuable. The books that you have written are incredibly valuable. And
no, I don't regret it. I'm sorry. I didn't want to make it sound like that. I don't regret it.
But it's true. It's true that that's the world we live. The only way the position that we're often forced into when we're defending student debt cancellation and the like is to talk in terms of the value of degrees and to say things like, well, it's not fair as long as we have the system that we have that's so hierarchical and demands a higher education for more salary, to say that poor people whose parents can't afford college, should not be able to have access to the same opportunities. But what I would really much rather be arguing is education is a human right. It has inherent value. If people want to go get master's degrees in ceramics, as far as I'm concerned, there's a value there. And if we decide that everyone has at least, 4 years of education free, maybe the state doesn't pay for your 10th year learning about basket weaving. But hey, like these crafts are also a valuable part of our society.
Absolutely. Let's go from this to the next point, which is the sort of the point of the talk that I gave that you can easily find on if you go to my website, tcfrank.com. And that's the point is this. We've had a decades-long, trial period of testing out the idea of reform from the top down, reform by highly educated white-collar elites. We gave it the ultimate test, I'd say, in the Barack Obama administration when he's faced with a world historic economic catastrophe. And he brings in a whole bunch of experts in the subject, the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, a whole bunch of Wall Street bankers to solve the problem. What do? They bail out their friends. They make sure their friends get all their bonuses, and they don't lift a finger for homeowners. They do very, very, very little for homeowners. And none of the bankers who committed obvious fraud, obvious prima facie fraud, none of them get punished. Okay. So I would say that the model of social democracy from the top down has been tried and utterly failed. And I would say the same thing about Obamacare, that social democracy from the top down gives you a system like that. That's like so contrived and distorted, and it's all to keep the insurance industry and big pharma in their lofty positions. It's all to do favors for their class mates, if you will, their fellow white collar elites, the guys they went to Harvard with. I'm sorry, I'm making fun of your alma mater.
I really promise you, I don't mind. Go for it.
Yeah. I should.
Put them out of business before they can collect the last of my loans from me.
I know. And I went to the University of Chicago. I have no right to be. You
and Bernie both.
That's right. As a matter of fact, yeah. Anyhow, so. Wait, where was I? Oh, so social democracy from the top down has been tried and found wanting. We've had a real world trial period, and this is a disaster. This is a catastrophe. It didn't work. What does that leave us with, Briahna? It leaves us with the old school model, which is reform from the bottom up, which is reform demanded by working people coming together in a massive social movement. And we've seen this doesn't exist now, but we've seen this at work in American history 3 important times: in the 1890s, in the 1930s, and in the 1960s. And all 3 of those occasions, it got incredible reforms done. It got things done. It delivered the goods. Now, the name for this is populism. And this is what my entire career has been about. It's like, how do we get that? How do we make that happen again? Because it's now perfectly obvious to me that we are going by the present model for the Democratic Party is going nowhere. The present model for the Republican Party is extremely dangerous. I think the present model for the Democrats can't even stop them. Right? These guys it's just going to go on and on and on and on. But this model for the Democratic Party, where it's about highly educated people running everything and doing like little tiny reforms here and there, just enough so that they can claim to be to the left of center.
Pay-go exemptions. We gotta
means testing,
Easter egg in the whatever ASU assignment. What's going on here? I mean, look, this is an opportunity just to bring it back to. I can't get off my mind what's going on in Congress right now. There have been conversations about Democrats voting present to allow Kevin McCarthy just to go ahead and take the gavel so we can move on from this. Democrats have said they're going to hold firm and not do that. And it's obvious why, as a party, it advantages them to draw out this Republican theater that makes them look bad, that the media is making is describing as a mulligan, as something that makes the Republicans look disorganized, even though even that is a choice, but never mind, I won't get into that. But imagine a world where the progressive said, you know what? I won something too. And maybe I will threaten to go ahead and vote for Kevin McCarthy if either the Republicans are willing to give some concession to the progressive Democrats, something that we can agree on, maybe something around military funding, Ukraine aid, some of these things that the left and right have agreed on historically. Or perhaps the Democratic Party will actually give me something to not do that.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's something to be said for, you're just talking about doing like basic politics, right? That's what sounds
like it to me, but you think I was talking about landing on Mars. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I'm nobody. I'm nobody. What do I know about anything? I'm speaking it with a lot more bass in my voice, proverbially, than I was 2 years ago when we were talking about force the vote. Because now we've been through this.
What?
Yeah, we
did you say bass in your voice?
Yeah, it's like a metaphor, like people on the internet, like.
Okay, it's not.
Speak up. I'm saying it with confidence, with bass in my voice.
I'm so out of the loop.
It's like black flag. I don't know, probably, but 2 years ago, I had more timidity about, well, is this a good strategy? Like, it makes sense to me, and I'm testing it, and I'm asking people, I'm consulting with folks who have been reporting on the Hill for a long time. Now that we've seen that the chosen strategy of playing nice, being nice to Pelosi, keeping your head down, waiting for committee assignments didn't work. Now that we see that they got worse committee assignments in 2021 than they got in 2019, with Katie Porter being kicked off the Financial Services Committee, despite being so effective because Maxine Waters was having trouble fundraising off of all of the banks, with Katie Porter there being really loud about how corruption is bad.
Yes.
When we saw the way that the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer and leadership, and along with Joe Biden, threw the $15 minimum wage out of the window, decoupling it from the must-pass COVID legislation so that it was subject to a 60 vote margin instead of a 51 vote margin. And so Democrats could plausibly say, oh, it wasn't my fault. It was Republicans the reason why we don't have the $15 minimum wage. When you've seen these machinations, the bifurcation of the Build Back Better bill, so all of the must-pass stuff is very neatly put to the side so Republicans can vote for it and all of the pork for their districts, but all of the human infrastructure stuff gets quashed in the middle of a pandemic, a child tax credit, all of these things that were helping working people. The Democratic Party is still saying very loudly it doesn't care about being a populist party. And even the progressives
they hate that word now. They hate that word now.
Well,
the party of the left hates that word. It's their own tradition. They don't,
It basically means
keep going. You're on a roll.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that just like, it drives me up the wall, but that's, here's where I think
read people know, by the way, for the history of that tradition that you've written so compellingly about. And if folks haven't read Listen Liberal, I swear to you, I was reading Listen Liberal in the spring of 2016 or the summer fall of 2016 as that election was folding out, whatever the word I'm trying to
unfolding.
Yes. Unfolding. Yes. Thank you. And the way that it was so prescient, the way that you called every move, the way that every explanation that you offered in the book for how the Democratic Party got to be this way was ringing so true, was one of the most radicalizing reading experiences of my life. So I cannot recommend that enough to folks who haven't already read it as well.
Well, thank you, Briahna. Where you were going with all this, I think, is, and I want to try to put it in my own stupid frame of reference, which always goes back to Kansas. So I grew up in this neighborhood of Kansas City. It's in the state of Kansas, in Johnson County, Kansas. The neighborhood is called Mission Hills, and it is where the ruling class of Kansas City lives. And I wasn't one of them. We were not wealthy, but I lived there anyways. And so I would, I went to school with them, and I would play with them. They own the place. And when I was a kid, I thought they were the most Republican people in America. I lived in the most Republican place there was, that it was possible to live. And, the Republicans held every office, and there's all the delegation to the state legislature was Republican. I remember going to vote. We used to have to vote at the local country club. I'm quite serious. That was the polling place. And I went over there to vote one time with my brother. It would have been in the 80s, probably 88, maybe 84. Anyhow, they had I was registered as a Democrat, which was very unusual there. And they got down, they had a huge printout of every of the Republican registries, right, of the people who'd registered Republican. Their printout, their similar one for the Democrats was a single page. I was on it, right? They found me on it, and that place, like I say, the most Republican place in America, and to this day, it's still the same people. It's the same kind of people anyway. It is the ruling elite of the city and of the state. Just went for Biden. Went for Biden pretty overwhelmingly in 2020. The whole county, by the way, finally flipped. They'd voted for every Republican since 1916, and in 2020 they finally went for a Democrat.
To what do you attribute that? Because I've heard you say things, and in your talk you say that Biden does get it somewhat with respect to the way he talks about issues and at least the performance of a kind of everyday guy populism.
Yeah. I don't think Biden is. Look, whatever I say about Biden, people are going to give me shit for it. So you know this. This is a no-win situation. So I'm kind of just going to ignore him. And look, the party is moving in this way that I don't think it's like a locomotive, and I don't know if there's any way that people like you and I can stop it. Briahna, it's very difficult for individuals to understand the power of concentrated capital. And the Democratic Party has become the party of a certain, if not the elite, of a certain segment of the American elite. We know that the Republicans, of course, still have their billionaires. But there was a song long ago when I was a punk rocker. There was a song called Cool Millionaires, Bogue Millionaires. And
Cool Millionaires, Bogue Millionaires?
Yeah. Like cool millionaires / bogue millionaires, like bogus millionaires. Like
I see. Sorry, bogus. Okay.
And this song was for many years, and I would use this as a subtitle of chapters and stuff like that. Cool millionaires, bogue millionaires, because that's like as if that was the real difference in American life. You have cool millionaires, you have bogue. Well, it's true now. We have cool billionaires who fund the Democrats, and we have bogue billionaires who fund the Republicans, and that's really where we're at. These
Elon Musk wars certainly seem to be, the fact that we're having weird cultural battles over. Elon was left when he had electric cars, and now he's because he's mad at his trans daughter or whatever. And who can keep track even? And I was saying this today on Rising, like sometimes we do these segments that are critical of Elon, not for the reasons that a lot of liberals criticize him, but for, I care about these free speech issues. I think it would be great if Elon Musk took over Twitter and unbanned people that have been banned for ideological reasons, especially since so many of those people are on the left, right?
Yeah.
I would love for there to be more transparency to the policy and those kind of decisions that are being made. But he did not, in fact, do that. And when you point those kinds of things out, there are a bunch of people who won't take your criticisms in good faith because they think that you're just like crunchy vanilla, some liberal who's mad that he tweeted some meme that I didn't like about a Pepe. I don't care about any of that. You know what I mean? But those are the judgments that are being made. Like, we can't even have a conversation about what it means for Elon Musk to have the concentration of wealth that he can lose $200 billion in a day or in a week?
I know. It's actually, I'm really enjoying watching Twitter crash and burn. The guy has just spent all that money on his own company, and then he's like wrecking it. I love it. And I'm also riveted by the Twitter files. But
yes,
all that's kind of beside the point. The idea that, I used to write for fairly intellectual magazines. There used to be magazines that were both popular and culturally sophisticated in this country. And it's like everything has, news. There were also newspapers in every small town in Kansas and Missouri. It's all swept away, and we're all on this central, social medium where we fight with each other all the time. We're like snakes constantly going at it with one. I hate it. And then above it all are these, these billionaires. And it feels to me, and I sort of worked this out better in the talk and in the New York Times op-ed that you were talking about a minute ago. It's like we have traded everything that the Democratic Party used to be about so that our leaders can have, live in a nice compound on Martha's Vineyard.
Quite literally.
That's a really cynical take, but I every now and then I really feel like it's, really goddamn close to true.
When look, I got a lot of heat over Force the Vote 2 years ago, and there are fissures that still exist within the left as a consequence of the sides people took during that debate. I have been under enormous pressure to stop talking about it. I have lost subscribers over talking about it. I rarely log into Reddit because whenever I do, it's somebody having a screed about how I'm the dumbest person alive because I thought that withholding the vote for Nancy Pelosi was a good strategic thing. All of this, right? And I have every incentive to kind of shut up and stop because I was there in 2018 as a new hire to The Intercept on the AOC beat, covering her closely. I've interviewed her several times. Me interviewing her at South by Southwest in 2019 was the biggest South by Southwest audience they'd ever had to date. Like, I had a lot of invested in her success, kind of professionally as a reporter and someone who was looking forward to her rise, and also as someone who was ideologically aligned with her, obviously. And it gives me no pleasure to observe what I perceive subjectively to be failures. But given the state of affairs that you've laid out so compellingly today and in all of your books and articles and talks, and given the stakes being what they are, I really do feel like it's a real responsibility for me to be critical of these squad members, not because I think that the movement is going to come from the top down, but when you have so few levers to even expose, to highlight the captured nature of government, the nefarious corporatization of our politic, the things that really could be done that don't get done by Democrats and that there's no accountability for because the corporate media never asked how Biden could do better. They just ask how he's better than the conservatives. I feel like I have a moral obligation to poke whatever fleshy little belly still exists for me to try to galvanize action. And that, for better or for worse, are these squad members. It's not because they are the worst. It's because they're the best of a bad bunch. And it's tough, but because I don't want to be the person who sits there looking like they're like, oh, AOC is an address I didn't like, but what else is there? I mean, I'm despairing. Like, we are sitting here, we're organizing, people are trying. Look at what Biden just did with this railroad strike.
Yeah. Hey, Briahna, I share your frustration and your sense of, your real sense of frustration at all this. I feel exactly the same. And, I basically write history, right? So there's no chance of, but what it's obvious to me what has to happen in this country, and that's a mass movement of ordinary people. It's obvious. Now, the right keeps delivering this in this sort of phony versions. You get the one phony version after another, right? The Tea Party movement, the Trump movement, these fake populist mobilizations. When are we going to have the real thing? I thought for a long time, not for a long time, for a little while, that Black Lives Matter was going to become that for our time, but it didn't.
Almost immediately, because remember, it was a campaign year. It was an election year. George Floyd died, like a month before the end of the primary? Maybe just a few weeks before, or was it just after Bernie dropped out? Bernie was April. George Floyd was, I think, May. I think it was May. This was the moment for all of those 20 million people in the street to say, hey, criminal justice reform is on the table. I will vote for you, Joe Biden, but only if. And by the way, Black Lives Matter, back in like the 2016 era, before it got completely co-opted, used to have a website that listed as among its priorities basically an entire Bernie agenda.
Yes.
Medicare for all,
that's right.
Free college, all of that.
Yep, you're right.
They scrubbed that when it got corporatized and when they were clear that there was, Hillary Clinton wasn't going to do those things, so they scrubbed it.
Oh, that's depressing. That is depressing.
I mean, that's my perception of it back. DeRay McKesson, who was perceived as the figurehead of the movement, even though he really wasn't, endorsed Hillary Clinton, and it was all a wrap. And so, there was a world where, because of the alignment of the timing of that movement and the political moment that was happening, there could have been real concessions demanded. But what happened? A couple of celebrities, because that's all we have is celebrities, politicians weren't going to do it. A couple of celebrities raised their head and said, hey, I think Black people in particular should get something in exchange for their vote, people like Ice Cube. And everybody turned on them and acted like they were Trump spokespeople as a consequence of saying that.
Yeah. It is an extremely frustrating time. It is. There's no question about it. Extremely frustrating time. And I feel like, I've been in journalism for a long time. Like, journalism has less and less and less. I mean, there was a time when if you had a major scoop in the newspaper or TV news or something like that, the wheels would turn. Things would happen.
Yeah.
Those days are over. People come up with unbelievable scoops all the time. Nothing is done. Nothing.
Look at the George Santos story. Have you been following that?
Yes,
a local paper covered it.
It's beautiful. How did that guy get elected?
And that's the thing. A local paper actually exposed him for all of his lies.
Yeah.
But nobody picked it up. Nobody noticed. Nobody saw it. And I think with the resources in local journalism being what they are, they didn't stand a chance. It was probably behind a paywall somewhere.
Yeah. So the point of journalism is to go out there and police people and, this gigantic war of all against all, which is Twitter, which is Facebook. And the journalists sort of sit at the very top of that. And it's like, what the hell? Anyhow, I keep coming back to this. We're never getting out of this without a mass movement. We're never getting out of this without populism.
You're right. And you know what? I was going to frame that as like a little dispiriting, but it's not dispiriting. It is what it is. It's what it always has been. And I'm so grateful to you for having written so many amazing, useful histories so that we can see that we are not at the end of days. We're in the midst of one of these ebbs and flows and cycles that come periodically. And there's a lot to be gained from the political moments we're in. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about all of this stuff today. Once again, you're the perfect guest for the moment in the day. I don't know how we keep doing this.
It's very nice of you, Briahna, because I swear I was working on my stamp collection, and then I came down and talked to you. Now I'm going to go back to working on my stamp collection. I don't know anything about what this Kevin McCarthy. I don't know.
Well, I should probably follow that advice, but I won't. I'm going to hang up from you. Write a radar for tomorrow and keep watching the news. So relax for the both of us. Let the audience know where they can find you on the internet, find your books, and find your talk.
So I don't tweet anymore. I don't really write for anybody anymore, and I don't really post very much on Facebook anymore. So there you go, Briahna.
Wow.
No, they can find me if you go down the street to what they call a bookstore, and no. Let's see. I basically have stopped writing about politics because I'm working on another project, which you and I will talk about one of these days. I'm in the middle of research for it, which is a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing research. They can't really. I have a website. That's it.
Yes. There you go.
tcfrank.com. It's called tcfrank.com, and you can see video of me going around the country talking to different groups of my kind of Democrat, not the white collar bunch, but my kind of people.
Not the classmates. I love that turn of phrase.
Yeah, but it's perfect, isn't it? Because it's social class and Harvard. Sorry, I keep giving you shit.
Don't apologize. Don't apologize to me over that. Never. Love means never having to apologize about Harvard. All right. Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you all to the listeners. As you know, Bad Faith comes out twice a week. You can get an additional episode of Bad Faith by subscribing at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. And that comes out on Monday. You can get visual and audio at the Patreon website. Hope you enjoyed this free Thursday episode. And I will be on call-in later tonight to discuss if you have thoughts and feelings about this episode. So I look forward to talking to you then. As always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.